Hey, let me tell you a story. Brooklyn was breathing steam through the grates, and the night tasted like metal and rain. I followed the base down a block that maps don't bother with, and a door opened without a name or a sign, and someone's hand pressed my shoulder like a stamp that said you belong for now. Inside, the air was thick and sweet like a kitchen after midnight, and the lights moved like scissors, cutting strips out of the dark. The sound hit my chest first, then my legs, then my head, and the whole room agreed on a single heartbeat. I told myself I was just passing through like a train that never stops at the platform, and I said I was fine. I said I had control. I said it twice just to hear the word echo. A palm slid against mine, and it felt like a warm towel from the dryer, and suddenly the room got kinder and softer, and the edges on every face turned round. That was Molly talking without a mouth. The music didn't play, it lifted and carried. People were not strangers, they were neighbors in a city with no locks, and every shoulder felt like it knew my name even if no one said it out loud. I closed my eyes and the kick drum turned into stairs I could climb forever without getting tired. Water tasted like rescue, and the laugh next to my ear sounded like a summer you never got to finish. It was all breath and body and a kind of forgiveness that only happens when you forget what you were supposed to be angry about. We swayed in a tide that never broke against any shore. I thought about the morning like it was a rumor, and I let it pass. The room smelled like sweat and perfume and new concrete, and every color bled into the next, as if someone poured hot light over the crowd. There was no past, no future, just now and now and now. I remember the railing under my hand, cold and real, the good kind of cold that keeps you upright. Someone bumped my shoulder, and I smiled without thinking, and they smiled back like we had known each other in another life where people slept and woke up on time. The bass rolled through us like a subway that never needed to stop, and I could feel my jaw loosen and my chest open and my spine relax like a zipper coming down. I told myself this was not a habit. I told myself this was a moment, and moments do not ask for rent. The DJ changed something I could not name, and the room tilted toward red, and the red did not feel like a warning, it felt like a blanket. I lay my head back and let the ceiling hang over me like the sky in an old movie. Everything was easy. Everything said yes. Even my bones said yes. This is the part of the night where you think you will always be like this. This is the part where the city seems designed for your exact pulse, and you are perfectly sized for the doorway and the street and the breath of the person next to you. We were a choir without a song, we were a team without a coach, we were a tide with no moon to answer to. I could have stayed in that answer forever. The sound smoothed my thoughts, and the lights combed my hair, and the crowd kept time with my lungs. You know the feeling. Hands open, no questions, no accounting, no tally of who owes who. That is what the warm current promises, and it keeps that promise just long enough for you to forget your own last name. Outside it must have been cold, but the door was gone, the idea of outside was gone, and even the floor felt like it wanted me to stay. A voice at my neck said the night has 3 more hours, and I believed it, and then a different voice said the night has no hours at all, and I believed that harder. I did not need to be brave, I just needed to be here. It is easy to love people when nothing is asking you to measure them. The song changed again, and for a second heard my own heart click against the kick, and it lined up perfectly like a lock turning smooth. That is the problem with perfect. Once you taste it, you start worrying about when it runs out. I did not say that out loud, but my shoulder knew, and my hands knew, and the soft inside my chest knew. A friend or a stranger, it is hard to tell in rooms like this, tilted their mouth toward my ear and whispered about a colder current, a sharper kind of awake away to keep the eyes wide when the warm river starts to slow. I shook it off like a fly at first, because I was still inside that glow, and that glow teaches you to forgive every whisper. But whispers return. They know the corners of a warehouse better than you do. They wait, and they tap, and they say just a little more, just a little longer, just a little stronger. I kept dancing, and the dancing kept me. Then something small shifted. It always starts small. The lights got grain in them like old film, and the kick drum that had been carrying me started to ask me to carry it. My balance wanted me to pay attention, and paying attention is work, and work is not why you come here. The water still helped, but it tasted like a key left too long in a pocket. I laughed at myself and said, "You are fine. You are just tired, you need air." The alley behind the door had a chill like a doctor's table, and the building across the way blinked one single window like a message I could not decode. I went back inside because the alley felt like a quiz I had not studied for, and the room felt like extra credit. But the room had changed without announcing it. The crowd moved closer, not in kindness, but in math. Faces were still beautiful, but their eyes asked what time it was, and I could not answer. I started counting steps in fours, because the song counted in fours, and when someone crossed me in fives, my chest flashed hot, and I told myself to breathe, and the breath came shallow like it had a curfew. The warm river slipped its banks and left me standing in the mud, and that is when the whisper found me again. "You want to keep this going," it said, and I wanted to say no, but my head tilted yes. "It will keep you sharp," the whisper said, and I wanted to be sharp, because soft was drifting away. "It will flatten the noise," it said, and the room was getting noisy in the wrong places. No one handed me anything in a way that would read like an instruction. This is not a tutorial, this is a memory. I will tell you only what it felt like. It felt like a switch thrown in a substation under the street. It felt like the lights got cleaner, and the gaps between sounds got wider. It felt like the room stepped 1 inch closer without moving. It felt like my thoughts stood up straight like soldiers, and my skin got just a little too tight. It felt like I could see the DJ thinking. It felt like every exit sign wrote my name with its green paint. It felt like the floor was a map and all the lines led to now. The warm blanket was gone, and in its place was a glass sheet. A clear, crisp pane laid over everything. I was inside and outside at once, like a person looking at a shop window with his own reflection in it. That is the thing about the colder current. It offers focus like a gift and bills you with interest later. It made the kick drum precise and the bass a blade and the crowd a diagram. For a few minutes, that precision tasted like victory. I could stand in the middle of moving bodies and read their paths like traffic. I told myself I had cracked a code. I told myself I had found the secret frame between frames where nothing can touch you. The problem with the secret frame is that it is lonely. The smiles around me stopped landing, and the hands that touched my shoulders were not towels anymore, they were signals. Every look meant something, and it all meant the same word: watch. I watched the door, and I watched the booth, and I watched the window that did not exist, and I watched the outline of the speakers like they were guarding a vault. I checked the time on a phone that was supposed to be sleeping, and its face looked back like it did not recognize me. I went for more water, and it did not cool the inside of my head, and my jaw felt like a hinge that needed oil. I breathed carefully like a person walking with a full cup and no lid. The music was still good, but it was not kind. It was steel, and it was math, and it asked for something I did not have anymore. I wondered if anyone else felt the room tilt, and then I decided yes, of course, they do. And then I decided no, of course, they do not. Because why would they? And then I counted the exit signs again. I kept it together, because that is what you do when the room asks if you can. Shoulders square, eyes forward, hands relaxed. Because if your hands tell the truth, your face does not have to. I tried to text someone, and the words on the screen were too bright and too thin, and I deleted them before they left. I told myself I would leave after the next song, and then the next song, and then the next one. I told myself I was not staying because of the whisper, I was staying because of the story I would tell later, about how I held the line. You always think there will be a later. You always think there will be an after where you can sort the pieces into piles. The music cut quiet for a second and the room's real sound reached me. Air handlers and shoes and breath and a cough that kept happening in the same place. It stitched into my ear and I could not shake it. My spine hummed like a transformer on a pole, and the humming did not line up with the kick anymore, and that made me feel like I had missed a step on stairs I had climbed all my life. I smiled bigger than I felt, because that is a trick that still works in crowds. A hand waved in the corner of my eye and I flinched more than the gesture deserved. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I told myself the light is always tricking. I told myself to ride it out. And I could have. I could have ridden it out if the whisper had not brought a friend named Longer, and a friend named Later, and a friend named Just in Case. This is Brooklyn, and the night does not end so much as it runs out. And when it runs out, you are left with your legs and your breath and whatever story you can stand to carry home. Mine was getting heavier by the minute. The warm current was. A postcard now and the glass pane pressed closer, and the music kept winning the test it was giving me. I needed a reason to stay, and the whisper handed me one. It said you wanted a wake, and here it is. It said you wanted control, and here it is. It did not say the part where control starts keeping score. I did not hear that part yet. I only heard the lever clicking somewhere below my feet. Neat and final, like a switch being locked into place. And I told myself I was still the one throwing it. I told myself that as the door took a little longer to find, and the alley felt a little narrower, and the window across the way blinked again. I told myself that as my heart tapped a new tempo, and my legs rehearsed the walk home, and my head rehearsed the locks, and the shades, and the way the room would feel without any of these people in it. I told myself I was fine, and the room nodded like a liar who wants you to like him. And the night kept its hand on my shoulder and guided me back toward the floor where the lights turned white and thin and the sound brought every edge back. And I realized this was the kind of awake that does not end when the music does. This was the kind of awake that follows you out into the street and up the stairs and into the bathroom mirror where your eyes look almost familiar and not quite. And I understood that the story I was telling myself about control had changed tense without asking me. And the only thing left to do was dance a little longer and pretend the glass was air. Because once you start pretending you can breathe through glass, you can stay anywhere. Even in a room that has no name and no time and no mercy for people who confuse sharp with safe. The street outside my building felt like it was still moving under my feet. Steam in the grates. Sodium lamps humming like a bad secret. I told myself. The night was over, but the night had followed me home. I sat on the edge of the mattress with my shoes still on, because unlacing them felt like a test I would fail. The room smelled like dust and detergent and the inside of an old speaker. My hands would not stop being hands. They kept telling me to do things. Open a window, close a window, check the door twice, check it a third time because the second check could have been a memory. The radiator clicked and a sharp clean alert ran up my spine. Ordinary sounds were not ordinary anymore. Somewhere downstairs a pipe coughed and the cough became a pattern. The pattern became a message. The message was for me. I pulled the blinds and watched the space between slats turn into a barcode. The barcode said wait. The phone on the nightstand glowed even when the screen was black. I turned it face down and the glow poured through the table like it had bones. I told myself to breathe. Slow and even. In for 4, out for 6. But the count broke apart like wet paper. The apartment was too bright even with the lights off. Everything had edges. The sink had edges. The doorknob had edges. Even the air had edges. It slid along my skin like glass. I thought about the warm current from the club and how it promised I would be fine. And now this colder current was promising I would stay awake long enough to make sense of it all. But sense is a shapeshifter at 4 in the morning. I opened the laptop because a voice in my head said company. Not people, just presence, a moving frame that could hold the noise. Clips found me like stray cats, bright faces and louder gestures. No plot, no mercy, no need. I let them run on mute the way you leave a hallway light on. I told myself this was harmless, and the word harmless did not sound like a lie yet. Minutes became thin and silver. I could see through them to the next minute, waiting with its hands in its pockets. The fridge knocked and I stood up like someone called my name. I walked to the kitchen without turning on the light because I trusted the shadows more. The hum did not come from the fridge. It came from everywhere, from behind the walls and inside the floor and between my ribs. I pulled the plug and nothing changed. That is when I knew the sound was living in me. I poured water. It tasted like a coin. The sink ran and I watched the stream for evidence. The stream did not confess. I stood there long enough for the fan in the bathroom to make a whole story out of its own breath. It was a story about someone in the hallway, then about someone outside the door, then about someone already inside. I checked the lock again, and the lock checked me back. Cool metal, little teeth, a simple machine that suddenly felt smarter than me. I told myself to lie down. I told myself to wait for the sun. The sun would rinse me. The sun would iron me flat. Except the first light that reached the edge of the blind looked dirty. It felt like it had been handled by too many strangers. I hated it for being weak. I loved it because it meant the night could not own me forever. My jaw had ideas and none of them were restful. I cradled it with my palm like you would hold a loud child. The mirror over the sink gave me a face I recognized, but not the eyes. The eyes were a half step ahead like a dancer who knows the next beat before the song arrives. I said we are fine, and my mouth made the shape, but my shoulders did not agree. The colder current spoke again, polite voice, the same one from the anonymous booth and the anonymous stairwell and the anonymous whisper in the club. It said you want it sharp and here is sharp. It said focus is safety. It said sleep is how they get in. It did not say who they were. The word there was enough. Paranoid does not need proper nouns. It just needs a pronoun and a door. I kept the laptop on with the sound off and let the images stack like dishes in a sink no one will wash. I scrolled without reading because reading would make it real. Faces changed. Rooms changed. Light changed. None of it touched me, and that felt like safety at first. Then it felt like drowning with your nose just above the line. I told myself food would help. Salt, sugar, something to pin me to my bones. The cereal tasted like cardboard. The toast tasted like old wood. I chewed anyway. Chewing was proof of life. I watched the window across my street and it blinked. Once. Then again, a single rectangle in a grid of sleeping bricks. That became a signal too. Everything was a signal now. The coat on the chair was a person. The person was a coat. The hiss in the pipe was a whisper. The whisper kissed the back of my neck and told me the steps in the hallway were counting me. The day tried to happen around me while I sat very still and pretended to be furniture. Around noon, I thought my heart had gone quiet, but it had only gone like a sewing machine, tight and even and exhausting. I answered a text with words that felt like someone else's handwriting. My friend said brunch and I said rain check even though the sky was clean. Another friend said you good and I said always, and the word always tasted like metal too. Afternoon bent itself into evening with no sound. The building settled. The street picked up. A siren drew a red line through the block and my nerves followed it like a dog on a leash. I tried to nap and woke up inside the same minute. I tried to shower and could feel every molecule of water as if they were names on a list. I tried to work and the letters refused to be letters. They were little gates that slammed at the wrong time. When darkness came back, the apartment felt too large and too small at the same time. I closed a door to make it smaller, then opened it to make it larger, then stood in the frame because neither size was bearable. I wanted sound that held me without thinking, so I let the laptop cough up its feast again. Bodies moving, bodies posing, bodies selling the idea of being touched. It did not make me want anything. It made me feel measured, like I was the one behind the glass. It was easier than silence. That was enough. The feed kept feeding and I kept taking in pictures like oxygen I did not love. I told myself it was only until the shiver in my chest calmed down. Just until the radiator forgave me. Just until the window across the street stopped blinking like it knew the beat in my head. But the shiver never really left. It nested. It learned the apartment. It learned me. The colder current had been generous in the warehouse and now it wanted rent. The rent was alertness. The rent was suspicion. The rent was the part of me that used to walk to the corner store without scanning every face. Midnight was a hallway. 2 in the morning was a knot. 3 was a trap door. I pulled the blinds again, as to listen to the string rattle against the slats. Small proof that physics had not been cancelled. My phone throbbed with messages I did not open. If I opened them, the words would be real, and I needed everything to be potential. Potential is softer than truth. I told myself work tomorrow would reset me. Fluorescent lights, stale coffee, the dumb comfort of office jokes. But then I remembered. The elevator has a mirror, and the mirror would ask me questions I could not answer. So I promised myself just one more hour awake. One more hour to land the plane. Only there was no airport. Only there was no plane. Only there was a pilot stitching the night to his own skin. The whisper came back with new clothes on. It said longer and I said maybe. It said clearer and I said maybe. It said safer and I said maybe. It did not say lonelier. That part one learned on my own. The edges of everything grew sharper again without getting kinder. The ceiling swam. Or, be it was my eyes. A car door downstairs slammed like a verdict and I jumped without moving. I put my ear to the wall and the wall told me stories. The couple next door arguing in a language I barely knew. The radiator breathing. The building settling like an old animal. But under all of it there was a line. A thin line. A test tone. And the test tone was me. Morning returned like an apology written on a receipt. I tried to stand in it and it slid off. I took a picture of my face just to check if I was still here. The eyes looked borrowed. The jaw looked tired. The mouth had learned how to smile without permission. I made coffee and watched the steam climb, and for a second it was beautiful. Then the second ended and the steam became another ghost. I left the apartment and walked to the corner without seeing anything. The deli bell rang and I almost cried. The kid behind the counter asked how you doing and I said good. Voice steady, hands steady, just enough human to pass inspection. Back home the silence was waiting in the hallway like luggage. I stepped over it and pretended it belonged to someone else. I kept the laptop off for an hour and the air turned thick like syrup. I turned it back on and let the room thin out. That is how it went. Wave and wall, wall and wave. No sleep that counted, no rest that stuck. Days stacked, nights stretched. The warmer current became a postcard I kept in a drawer I would not open. The colder current ran the apartment like a landlord. And somewhere in there, the story I had told myself about control changed endings. I started locking the bathroom door while I showered even though I lived alone. I started unplugging the modem because the internet can watch you even when you are not watching it. I started moving the couch an inch each day to make sure it was not secretly growing roots. The window across the street blinked at odd hours and I blinked back because that is what you do when you agree to a language no one taught you. The images on the screen blurred into a single bright river I did not want to drink from and could not stop drinking from. The city outside kept doing its job. Sirens, dogs, buses, a neighbor laughing at something I could not hear. I wanted to be bored. Boredom felt like a country had lost the passport too. I promised myself one night off. Real sleep. Lights out. Phone in a drawer. I lay down and the bed tilted into the same minute I had been stuck in for days. The kick drum from the anonymous booth flickered at the edge of my hearing and the exit signs in my head wrote my name again. I understood then that the kind of awake I had brought home does not leave with the sunrise. It nests in the corners and eats your quiet first, then your errands, then your friends, then your face. I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what it felt like to trust the dark. And when I could not, I told myself a story I did not believe. I said this is temporary. I said you will step out for coffee and the wind will move through you like a reset. I said you will turn the laptop off and the silence will be clean again. I said it until the words lost meaning. And when words lose meaning they become rhythm. And when rhythm is all you have left, you keep moving just to prove you are not a picture. I kept moving. Small circles in a small room. Sharp and safe. I told myself. Sharp and safe. I told myself again. And the room nodded like a liar who wants to be loved. If you are still here with me. If you are listening in the dark with the fan turning, and the blinds breathing, and the city knocking on the pipes, stay close. I've got more to tell. Subscribe for the next night. I will try to make it back with you.